Oh man, I realized that you guys missed the entire first portion of shoot. Now I don't know what to do. Oh my gosh. Okay. All right, so we're gonna have to improvise because now you guys can hear me. I didn't realize that I came into the show muted. That's crazy. That's never happened before. And I wasn't even looking at the comments here. So, man, I hate that because I just did a whole conversation. But I'll go back to everything that I discussed. Won't end up repeating it. I'll just go back to it later since I've already made you guys wait for the actual podcast. I'm just going to go ahead and do the intro again for the podcast here. Again, guys, welcome into the Dear Miss Fantasy Show with me, your host, Tera Roberts. This is the official mailbag show of PlayerProfiler. I botched my intro, so that'll be interesting to try and figure out what we've got going on there. But hopefully everything works and you guys can hear me now. I think so. I'm checking the audio. It looks good. Comment on the YouTube if you guys are watching and can hear me now. But welcome in. It is week 13. And finally, it is Thanksgiving, my favorite holiday. So this week's theme for the show is going to be things that I am thankful for, players that I am thankful for in fantasy football. And we'll jump right into that here in a second. I'm going to go ahead and start answering some questions here because unfortunately, we're like 7 minutes into the show. And I know you guys have some questions here. So let's go ahead and start diving into the questions, and then I'll dive into the players that I'm thankful for as well. So diving into the questions that we've got here live. Devontae Adams or Isaiah Pacheco at flex. That one is a tough one, honestly, because Isaiah Pacheco, unfortunately, we kind of are hearing that the snap count is not going to be what we expected before. And obviously at some point we might be able to, get into a more regular workload for him. That said, regardless of the fact that there is still going to be a presence for Kareem Hunt, I am starting Isaiah Pacheco. Upside for him is probably about the same as Devontae Adams, considering how volatile the Jets offense has been. So yes, Devontae Adams, we would sit him and I would start Isaiah Pacheco at flex. Especially because the matchup there. The matchup, if it was a bad matchup, maybe I could pass on that and just say, okay, just go with Devontae for the volume there. But Isaiah Pacheco, yeah, thanks. I wish that I had, when I start off, I see your comment, Lindsay, when I start off the show, I'm never looking at the comments section on the screen. And I wish I had seen it earlier. I'm like, I look and I'm checking, I see there's comments, and then I see that you guys cannot hear me at all. That drives me crazy. A few more questions here. Pickens, Tracy, Sutton need to start too. Sutton for sure. 100% Sutton. And then Pickens because I like the matchup. Tracy, unfortunately, has made me a little bit apprehensive, unfortunately, because of one, the volume has not been as steady as it was in the past. We are seeing Singletary get some increased workload. Obviously, the coaching staff is going through some influx in terms of trust potentially with Tyrone Tracy, trying to figure out how to push forward without turnovers. I know that's something that's probably affecting their view of him, unfortunately. At the same time, we've got yet another switch, unfortunately, at quarterback, or maybe fortunately, things might work out a little bit better with Drew Lock at quarterback. It's possible. But again, with a switch at quarterback, that first week, it just feels a little bit uncomfortable because the offense is really going to be trying to find itself. So unfortunately, Tracy is someone who I'm not trusting a ton right now. Nix or Murray, quarterback question. Now, this one is tough, to be very, very honest on that one. Nix and Murray, just because with Kyler Murray, honestly, it's been such an off again, on again, high upside. You start him and he disappoints you. You sit him and he goes off. It's so frustrating to the point where you're like, okay, on a consistent basis, I do have to roll him out and just kind of play the odds, right? But when you're comparing him to a guy like Bo Nix, quite frankly, who has been so consistent, has such a solid floor. And, once we get past that first portion of the season where he was obviously getting his feet wet, hadn't thrown any touchdown passes, things have gotten so much on track with him. I trust him to not ever finish as below a borderline QB1, to have a solid floor, even in a bad situation, in a bad matchup. And this is not the case this week. Fantastic matchup against Cleveland. Should be able to take advantage of that. Obviously, you know, I have not looked up weather yet, but weather in Cleveland is always a thing. But at the same time, Bo Nix is the profile of player that can succeed regardless. So Bo Nix is he's QB6 for me. Have him about 4 spots ahead of Kyler Murray this week. Rachaad White or Khalil Shakir at flex. I still lean towards Rachaad White. I have moved Bucky Irving up, obviously well above Rachaad White. We're trusting that from him and the volume that he's had. You know, while Rachaad White is still very, very involved in the offense, at the same time, Bucky is just clearly the better back, right? That said, there are touchdown opportunities. He's had last time Rachaad White did not have a touchdown was way back in week 5. So when you look at that, he doesn't offer the same upside that a Bucky Irving has, but his floor is incredibly solid there. Khalil Shakir has been strong, but at the same time, you know, he just doesn't offer a ton of upside. And you look at the matchup for Rachaad White against that Carolina defense, where you feel very inclined to just run aggressively on them. Rachaad White, I feel a little bit more confident in him than Khalil Shakir. Bo Nix or Justin Herbert? Justin Herbert is a very solid quarterback. Again, I do have him ranked just behind Bo Nix this week. Good matchup against Atlanta. There's opportunities that can happen there for him. And at the same time, you kind of wonder if they might, you know, lean a little bit more aggressively on the pass in this matchup because of the loss of J.K. Dobbins. But at the same time, they trust Gus Edwards. They have other backs that can step up as well. It is a situation where he just simply doesn't have that same ceiling as Bo Nix, and the trustworthiness in terms of the pass catchers, not as high as well, although Lad McConkey is excellent. He's just not at that Cortland Sutton level. And obviously Quentin Johnston is just very inconsistent and a little bit untrustworthy in terms of those hands. So Bo Nix has the better matchup, better situation, better trustworthy in terms of wide receiver 1. Bo Nix rushing upside as well, a little bit higher than Justin Herbert. So Nix is the guy that I would start over him. Pick 3, Neighbors, JT, K9, and London. You know, Neighbors is the one that I would sit there. I would go with the 2 running backs and London. Neighbors obviously has significant upside, but again, I talked before about the quarterback switch. The good thing here with the quarterback switch is that we should at least have more existing rapport. Last week, I was incredibly nervous about Malik Neighbors in his first game with Tommy DeVito, because realistically, there is very few scenarios where they would have had significant time to gain rapport and trust within each other and really be able to feel each other out. That's not the same with Drew Lock. Drew Lock would have had, you know, as the direct backup, Drew Lock would have had plenty of interaction with Malik Neighbors. Not a ton. They still need to work things out, but it shouldn't be as bad. But at the same time, you know, the running backs and Drake London are just so much more trustworthy. Neighbors is still a wide receiver 2 for me. It's not a complete fade this week, but if you've got safer options with safer floors in better situations, just go that direction. Would you play Braylon Allen if Breece sits? 100%. 100% would play him if Breece sits. When you're looking at Breece Hall, oh no, someone else said that they still can't hear me. I hope that's not the case. Everything should be good. Okay. But Braylon Allen versus Breece Hall. When we're looking at Braylon Allen versus, not versus Breece Hall, but if Breece Hall sits, we've seen the massive upside. So yes, if Breece Hall sat, he's absolutely in play. Now, granted, it does depend on who else he's playing against, just because, again, that offense in New York, for the Jets specifically, it's not gelling, and Aaron Rodgers is in such a weird place right now. I just don't see this turning around. Not a bad situation for Braylon Allen to come into, just from a general game perspective, but very uncomfortable, unfortunately, with the whole situation for the Jets in general. So it just depends on who you're playing against, but I would raise him up to a borderline RB2 if Breece Hall does sit. Not an absolute must start over everybody in the world. Seattle is a really good matchup. But again, just, bear in mind, there could be some volatility with that. So, yep, depends on who it is, but he's very much in play, at least a flex option. Couple more questions here, and then we're going to do a little commercial break. Panic with Jacoby Myers because Minshew is out for the season. No, if it was Desmond Ridder that was coming in, yeah, quite frankly, I would veer hard off track just because I can't trust Desmond Ridder at all. But at the same time, we do have Aiden O'Connell. We know that O'Connell can feed a wide receiver one. We did at least see it last season with Devontae Adams. Obviously, Devontae and Jacoby are two very different players. But at the same time, I do think, while Aiden O'Connell is not going to get out there and turn this entire offense around, he is stable enough to be able to feed volume to Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers. So him coming in does make me a little bit less panicked about this situation, because it's not as if Garner was fantastic, but he did have a good rapport to be giving solid volume to those two key pieces for us. But I think we're okay. I think we'll be okay with Aiden O'Connell at quarterback. That is not a ringing endorsement for Aiden O'Connell, but just we're not panicking over it with him. Not panicking too much. Someone asked, do I do NFL picks for betting? I do, but I just don't put that content out very often. It's a time constraint for me, unfortunately. So yeah, probably more than likely will not have any picks posted this week. I'm sorry. Marv and James Conner for Pacheco. Trade question, by the way. Marv and James Conner for Pacheco and Neighbors. That one makes me a wee bit uncomfortable. Especially considering that, again, we're at a place where we don't know if Pacheco is going to have a significant workload over the past couple, over the next several weeks during the fantasy playoffs. Pacheco to Connor, it just feels like you might want to stick with the safety of Connor. And I'm not sure that the upgrade in terms of, an overall ceiling. Now, the floor is probably safer for Neighbors, ironically, just because of sheer volume. But the ceiling difference between him and Marvin Harrison, not so different considering the quarterback situation. So I would probably stick it out with Marv and James Conner on that one. All right, guys, watching on YouTube and Twitter, we are going to take a little commercial break here. And we're going to hear a word from our sponsors. Be right back after this.
Oh, incredible news about Fast Draft. Fast Draft DFS is live. It's called the Flex 6 Frenzy. You just draft 6 guys, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends for the Sunday slate. You like Jahmyr Gibbs? You like Jackson Smith and Jigba? You like Tyrone Tracy? Draft him. And the beauty is you can just order 5 teams, submit your rankings, and Fast Draft will email you the results. We awarded $1,000 in prizes our first week, and we're just going up from there. Soon there's going to be a select 6. No drafting at all. You just pick any 6 guys. Our DFS mantra, just say no to salaries on Fast Draft. Don't forget there's free tools on Fast Draft too. You want to get ready for startup season? We've created the best Dynasty mock draft experience there is. And if you want to play in these DFS contests, and our best ball contest for 2025 are coming very soon too, just use promo code PODFATHER when you deposit and you get a free draft. It's that easy. And you're like, oh, I already have Fast Draft. Great. Refer a friend. Have them put your username in as the promo code, and then you and your friend will both get an instant deposit match up to $25. We got DFS. We got Dynasty Mocks. We got Best Ball. It's all there for you on fastdraft.app. Check it out. And the promo code is PODFATHER.
All right, we are back over here. I am double checking that I am not muted because we don't want that to happen again. Right, we're back to it. I'm going to talk here about the topic of the show here for a little bit, and then we'll jump back to answering questions here. The main thing that I wanted to talk about was I thought usually I do the topic of the show is centered around whatever article that I write for Yahoo on Sunday. Because one, it's convenient, it's an expansive topic, and generally transitions good to a podcast. But this week I talked specifically, wrote an article specifically about the Miami Dolphins. And while it was a fantastic article, and you should go check it out, absolutely, on my Yahoo Writers page, I didn't know if it would translate well to the podcast just because there was a whole lot of focus on one team. So I thought it would be cool to do a list of 5 players that I am thankful for this fantasy season. Players I am very thankful for, not fading and taking the chance on them, because as I was going through my fantasy teams and my best ball teams trying to figure out those perfect wide receivers, or those perfect wide receivers and running backs that have really just made the fantasy difference for me this year, I noticed a trend that it was a whole bunch of players that took chances on that were high risk, a lot of arguments against them, and they really panned out here. So I thought this would be a fun list because a lot of these players were faded by some people. So I want to start off with the first one here, and it's spoiler alert, it is a lot of running backs. But on the topic of Miami, it is Devon Achane. Super, super thankful for not fading Achane. Thanks to him and one other player on this list, actually two players on this list. I'm now in the second round of the Scott Fish Bowl because they have absolutely been killing it. Devon Achane, RB12 in half PPR on the season, averaging 15.1 fantasy points per game. Highly impressive considering the fact that Miami's offense was completely destitute without Tua Tagovailoa. So I'm going to do a little cherry picking of stats here just to show the level of upside that Achane has offered here. Stats with Tua specifically. Weeks 1 through 2 with Tua, Achane was RB3, averaging 22.8 fantasy points per game. When Tua returned, week 8 through 12, Achane was RB3, again, averaging 19.4 fantasy points per game. He is one of the most dynamic weapons in the league, and arguably one of the most prolific, if not the most prolific receiving back in the league. Let's just talk some general stats regarding his receiving work, because that's where it has been just incredibly impressive for him. The most receptions and most receiving touchdowns inside the 20 for a running back. Again, highly impressive considering that is across the entire season, inclusive of the stats with Tua. If you were to segment it out, the difference between him and the other backs would be even more drastic here. There was a ton of controversy around Achane being drafted so aggressively, right? Off of that, what was a season that was up and down for him in terms of volatility, right? In terms of splitting workload with Raheem Mostert, who led the league in rushing touchdowns, in terms of worrying about injury risk with him being a smaller back because he had been injured multiple times throughout the season and in the preseason as well. Being worried about how much Raheem Mostert was going to be involved, and the Dolphins drafting Jalen Wright. And not gonna lie, even I felt a little bit shaky every time I tapped that button to draft him because it was potentially a very volatile situation. But to think of what this season could have been if Tua was healthy, it's very within the realm of possibility. Now it's tough because of how insane Saquon has been, but Achane would have easily been top 3, potentially top overall running back with just how incredible his upside has been. Ironically, though, I think that we're going to have, if I had to predict, I think we're going to have these same conversations next season in 2025 with him, because all of the reasons that everyone was worried about Achane, those reasons are not gone, right? Jalen Wright will still be there. I think, Mostert should technically be there, but I think maybe he's not a significant threat. But the problem is that this was not a heavy, workload for him. He's had 132 carries thus far this season. That's not a aggressive workload on him. He's not a, significant volume type of back. Over 500 rushing yards, 562 rushing yards, only 3 rushing touchdowns here. This is not going to be, now granted, he could obviously go on a run to close out the season, but at the same time, he's, not thriving on the ground, although he's been perfectly fine, in a way that would eliminate the conversation that we were having this season. It's probably going to happen all over again. He gets it done. He is the most critical piece of the Miami offense. It's funny just because I do think that we're going to have continued skepticism next year, because as we're looking at fantasy drafts heading into 2025, he'll be a guy who is going to be ranked as a round 1 pick, and people are going to hem and haw and say that it's risky, and it'll just be funny to watch, right? Because he's been fantastic this season. So I am so thankful for Devon Achane Nice. I'm sure this comment from Lindsay because she has HN on 4 of her 6 teams. There you go. League winning upside there, taking that risk there with him has worked out beautiful for us. Another running back that was very risky heading into the season, I'll talk about in just a second. My second favorite that I am super thankful for. I'm going to answer some more questions that we've got here. Do I drop Ramondre for Tony Pollard? No, I would not do that. And I love Tony Pollard. I love how he has looked this season. When he has the vast majority of workload, he's a solid RB2 with huge RB1 upside. The problem is that Tennessee was very clear that they wanted to reduce workload on him. And when Tajay Spears came back from his injury, that is exactly what happened. Prior to last week, 2 games in a row, Tony Pollard had only had 9 carries in each of those games. And when, his upside was completely eliminated. His floor was ugly. And it just, from a fantasy perspective, once Tajay Spears comes back, and that could be this week because, again, it was a concussion. So, logically thinking this could be a week where he comes back. And even if he doesn't, the next week would be a very realistic possibility for him as well, more than likely back. Tajay Spears comes back. We would expect it to kind of go back to the same situation where they are splitting workload. Neither one of them has significant fantasy upside, unfortunately. So, when you look at it that way, I can't drop Ramondre Stevenson for Tony Pollard, although Ramondre has his problems for sure. And volume is inconsistent. He does have higher upside than Tony Pollard does. So no, I would stick it out with Ramondre Stevenson. I know the production was frustrating, but you'll be in the same situation with Tony Pollard with Tajay Spears back. Jonnu Smith or George Kittle at flex. It's George Kittle on that one. And it's tough because Jonnu has been magic, right? But George Kittle, clearly leading that 49ers offense from a pass catcher perspective. And at the same time, we are hopefully potentially getting Brock Purdy back this week. That would be fantastic. Again, I definitely have George Kittle ranked higher and would still lean that direction on him. Ooh, good question here. If Breece is out, do I start Braylon Allen or Calvin Ridley? Honestly, I kind of, that one is tough because the matchup is really good for Braylon Allen. It would be a good situation for him to be in. At the same time, when we're looking at Calvin Ridley, it's tough to sit him. This is a good matchup against Washington. There's opportunity through the air. Calvin Ridley has been very solid. The floor has been solid. What you would get out of him from a floor perspective, probably very similar to Braylon Allen, and Ridley would have the higher ceiling. I would lean towards Calvin Ridley over Braylon Allen. That one is tough though, but it would be Ridley over Braylon Allen. Calvin Ridley or MVS, definitely Calvin Ridley. MVS's upside is magical for sure. So I'm not opposed to MVS, but the problem is that if we don't get a touchdown from MVS, it would factually be just a horrifically ugly game. So I would rather take what I get with Calvin Ridley than Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Garrett Wilson or DJ Moore. It's interesting. Since we've had the change in offensive coordinator, obviously things have been better for not just, Caleb Williams, but the entire receiving core. That said, there's still volume spread around. I don't know if I fully trust DJ Moore. It is a difficult matchup as well. I lean towards Malik Neighbors. I lean towards Garrett Wilson over DJ Moore. Pick 3, Waddle, Bucky, Jennings, Tracy, Warren, or Taysom Hill. So Bucky for sure. That is the first one on there that we feel very confident with. And man, you're going to challenge me on that Taysom Hill one just because his upside is insane. At the same time, I would still go with Waddle and Jennings. It's tough. It is tough not to go with Taysom Hill, given the level of upside that he has. But, when it doesn't hit, when he's not breaking in those touchdowns, it is more so of a, fantasy point average that he has without the touchdowns. So I would just go ahead and take that risk of hoping for a repeat with Waddle. The safety of Bucky, who's been excellent, and then Jawan Jennings has been solid. And again, despite the matchup not being ideal, still think that with Brock Purdy hopefully being back, we'll have a good connection there. All right, before I answer some additional questions here, I'm going to talk about my second player that I am thankful for this holiday season, and it's Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams has been very solid this fantasy season, and recently solid floor games from him have kind of obscured the stats, just like, and maybe put like a little bit of a damper on it. But if you look at the season as a whole, Williams has been phenomenal, right? And really has dispelled all of the assumptions that people had heading into the season. He's RB10 in half PPR average points per game, right above our boy that we just talked about, Devon Achane, averaging 15.3 fantasy points per game. What I want to specifically point out with Kyren Williams is his usage in the red zone. His stats as a whole are fantastic, right? You can't be RB10 without that. But the red zone stats are truly phenomenal. It shows that this is a man that has clearly the full confidence of his head coach. And it's beautiful to see after an entire season that was spent after the drafting of Blake Corum by every single person, any analyst that was not named me, because you never find me saying that. I was team Kyren Williams, but everybody, so many people swore up and down that you can't trust Kyren Williams. He didn't have the draft capital. He didn't have the size. He didn't have the burst. Blake Corum was going to be coming in and taking that job. Then you had Sean McVay, knocking down the draft price for us. That was cool. Coming in and, talking about him being the punt returner and that whole, wild situation of, people thinking that, okay, clearly this is just Kyren being faded into the background. Blake Corum, he's taken that spot. You're crazy to draft Kyren Williams. Oh, no. This man has played upwards of 90% of snaps in most games. For perspective, even Saquon Barkley doesn't do that. McVay loves this man, has full confidence in him, utilizes him across the board. There is not a weakness to his game in McVay's eyes. In the red zone statistics, let's run through those, because that's where I really feel like you can just kind of define who Kyren Williams is as a player. He is fourth in average fantasy points per game inside the 20, behind Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry, and David Montgomery. Pause to think about the physical differences between those three backs and Kyren Williams. Like, just marinate on that for a second to truly understand just how impressive Kyren has been. He has the most attempts inside the 20, tied with Joe Mixon. He has third most touchdowns inside the 20. He has the seventh most targets inside the 20. So sometimes we don't see him as a massive receiving upside. He's not hugely used as a pass catcher, but when it counts, Sean McVay turns to him. But why stop at his statistics in the red zone inside the 20? Let's narrow it down specifically to inside the 5. Kyren Williams has the most fantasy points overall and an average points per game inside the 5. That is highly impressive. Highly impressive. On 15 attempts inside the 5, he has 8 touchdowns. That is the same as Derrick Henry. Like, pop off, Short King. I'm so impressed by the way that Kyren Williams has come through this season and just really dispelled the just all the assumptions of everyone heading into the season. The clear RB1, the confidence level that we have in him is just so strong. That's another one of those big wins for anyone that drafted him, especially if you drafted him on a discount there. Let's take some more questions here. Who would you drop for Kamani Vidal, Ertz, Goddard, or Pitts? It's easy Pitts for me. I don't even have to pause to think about that one, especially, and you're saying full PPR. In full PPR, it even makes it even more dramatic of a difference there, because PPR greatly favors Zach Ertz. Goddard has been a wee bit inconsistent, but he does offer a more solid floor than Kyle Pitts, unfortunately. It's been an interesting season for Kyle Pitts, to say the least. When we're looking at him and his overall impact, and then the boom games that he's had, and then the games have given you absolutely nothing that he has had, it's just been incredibly volatile, kind of, symbolic of his, entire career thus far. He's a fine tight end, right? But the level of consistency just isn't there from a fantasy perspective for us. So, yeah, of the guys that on that list, he's the one that I have lowest ranked, and he is the one that I would drop and feel comfortable with starting either Goddard or Ertz on a weekly basis over him. So, yeah, I would absolutely make that move for sure. More questions here. Ooh, Chubb or Chuba? I would go with Chuba. Chubb having that the strong breakout game last week, which was interesting because I had, called it the week before. That didn't happen. And of course, strong performance comes through in what, should have arguably not been the best matchup in the world, but weather did play a factor in that situation. That said, and it's tough to judge because it was a weather game, but he had 20 carries and 59 yards. Not super productive on the ground, right? So when we're looking at it from that perspective, the touchdowns were there, but that's no different than what we've been seeing before. This was kind of similar to the same production that he had since he's returned. He's going to have volume. He's going to be the RB1. He's going to get you about 50 yards on the ground. And you need touchdowns for him to be productive from a fantasy perspective. So this week, looking at a matchup with Denver, I don't feel super comfortable with it. Hey, Jameis can get out there and push the ball in weird situations, right? But this is just straight up a bad matchup for that to happen, right? And they're not a layup against the run either. So it's not as if, struggle against the pass, but really lean on Nick Chubb on the ground. Nope, that won't be the case either. Denver is just really solidified itself as an all-around, well-rounded matchup against all positions. And I just do not feel comfortable with Nick Chubb compared to Chuba Hubbard, who I know gives me a certain level of floor. The floor is just so much more solid with him. The upside is very similar. It's an easy Chuba Hubbard for me, and it's quite frankly not even close. In my rankings, there's a good 10 spots between them. Chuba is a mid-tier RB2 with clear RB1 upside. Chubb is a guy that I just don't feel super comfortable with, even coming after that fantastic performance of the 2 touchdowns last week. Again, touchdown dependent. Derrick Henry or Cooper Kupp in flex. I would still go with Derrick Henry. It's not the most ideal matchup in the world, not a good matchup at all. But at the end of the day, volume still does favor him. He's able to pull through, and I lean towards Derrick Henry over Cooper Kupp. Murray or Herbert? I had this one earlier. I don't think I had this one earlier. I think I talked about both of these players in detail, but not them one versus the other. I do have Herbert higher. It is a sad fact that his ceiling is not as high as Kyler Murray's, but his floor is a whole lot safer. So Justin Herbert is the guy that I would start. DK or Mixon rest of year for fantasy. It's Mixon for sure. Mixon for sure. It's weird how the identity of that Houston offense has kind of leaned aggressively on the ground game, and fluctuation in terms of health of the pass catchers does make a big difference on that. But at the same time, sorry, I just saw a weird update come through regarding the Alabama player. Okay, I won't talk about that on this show. It was just kind of jarring to see the update come through in the notifications. But when we're talking about Joe Mixon and the impact that he's had this season from the get-go, even when all 3 of the receivers were healthy. Now, technically, Tank Dell wasn't healthy right off the bat. At the same time, they've just leaned so aggressively on the ground game there. And I think it continues rest of season. They really are leaning into him, and he's thriving. I trust him more in DK's situation with JSN making that push. It makes me a wee bit uncomfortable. I'm not going to lie. I've gotten to the point where I do rank JSN higher than DK Metcalf rest of season. So, DK, in my opinion, has kind of lost that overall fantasy wide receiver 1 perspective in the offense there. So I don't trust it significantly. So yeah, I've got problems with DK rest of season, unfortunately. Jonnu Smith or Evan Ingram. I have, let me double check on that just because that one is actually like super close. I have Evan Ingram one spot higher. I knew they were back to back. I just couldn't off the top of my head remember which one I had higher. It's Evan Ingram that I have higher. Now, this is again very much so tied to the thought of potentially Trevor Lawrence coming back. If he does not come back, and now actually now that I think about it, for you specifically comparing these two, because if let me way rewind this because I'm about to start rambling. As of right now, I have Evan Ingram ranked one spot higher than Jonnu Smith, but that is with the assumption that Trevor Lawrence is coming back. Jonnu Smith has a Thursday game. So because you are comparing those two players and you cannot wait for the potential health of Trevor Lawrence, you should go ahead and start Jonnu Smith. So that is specifically for you. I would go ahead and start Jonnu Smith because if Trevor Lawrence was out, I would absolutely raise Jonnu Smith above Evan Ingram in rankings. Nuanced question. Got another Jags question in. Brian Thomas Jr. or Khalil Shakir? That one again is another very much so based off of Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence is back. I would go with Brian Thomas Jr. Ridley, McConkey, Terry McLaurin, sit one. It would be McConkey. Coming on strong for sure. I just feel it, Ridley has the higher upside. I'm willing to risk it. I know that people are a little bit uncomfortable with Terry McLaurin, especially because a lot of that, fantasy production came in the second half, specifically at the end of the game as well. But Terry McLaurin's upside, just based off one catch, is so magical. Terry McLaurin is someone who remains in my starting lineup regardless. Let's go ahead before we jump into a few more questions. Go ahead and talk about my third player that I am most thankful for in fantasy football this year. This is not biased because he is a Packers, and you guys know I'm a Packer fan. It is Josh Jacobs. Now, another guy, you see a theme with this list. First, we had Devon Achane, then we had Kyren Williams, now we have Josh Jacobs. The theme here is drafting guys that people swore up and down were either too volatile, going to lose their starting job, or potentially washed. Washed was the accusation with Josh Jacobs, and that Marshawn Lloyd was going to cut into it and be the future there. And just so many think pieces on, his contract and explaining how it wasn't really that great of a contract. And that meant that he was not going to be the RB1. Instead, here we've got Josh Jacobs dominating, strong workload here. And he is RB9 in half PPR average points per game. He is thriving, and he is not just thriving, but he is the driving force in this offense, honestly, because Matt LaFleur has relied heavily on the ground game as we've gone through these, the volatility with some inconsistency in Packers receivers, right? Inconsistency with Jordan Love's health. Matt LaFleur has adjusted the offense and just said, we're going to lean heavily into Josh Jacobs. It's working, and he's thriving. Jacobs has the fourth most attempts in the league behind Saquon, Derrick Henry, and Kyren Williams. Now, we love that Kyren Williams is up there, right? The volume. This is something that I feel like needs to be said specifically with Josh Jacobs and apply it to literally everyone else in the league. Remember, and this is advice to myself as well, because sometimes I begrudgingly ignore it because I just want to do something else. Like, hey, I took Christian McCaffrey in a couple leagues this year, begrudgingly. I didn't feel super happy about it. I was just like, oh, okay, let's do this. But remember this key little piece here: running backs who are coming off of atypical workloads or high workloads, off of maybe a year where they were injured or something, but atypical workloads heading into the next season, they tend to have bad years, right? That are riddled with injuries and inefficiency. Very similar to what we are seeing here with Christian McCaffrey. This is what happened with Josh Jacobs. In 2022, he had that massive outlier year where he just had the dumbest amount of carries ever. He was in on every single play. He was heavily used on third downs. He was just thriving from a workload perspective. And 2023, obviously massive down year for him. didn't handle volume well, just was banged up, didn't look like himself. Running backs that have big workloads just tend, they come in the next year and they're tired, man. They're tired. Their bodies are beat up, even though they had the off season off. It's not unusual for that to happen. It's actually quite common. So, a lot of people drafting were kind of influenced into thinking that what we saw out of Josh Jacobs was just, that's who he is right now. He's hit, which is peculiar because he's not an old back by any means, but for some reason, it was just that perspective that, he was potentially washed here and that he could not be an RB1 and he just was not an effective back. Coming off of that big year, finally now, we see that he's still the same player that he was before. He still is talented. He still can handle workload. Things to keep in mind as we continue through the fantasy season here and apply it next year. Now, we got a little visit from my son. Hi. Say hi.
Hi.
Okay. All right. Thank you, buddy. Let me finish working. Okay.
Can I tell you something?
Yep. You can tell me something.
You did make my food.
Okay. I'll be done in a little bit. 5 minutes.
No. Wait now.
All right. So let's go on and talk about, let's do some more start sits, and then we'll talk about a couple other players here. Tight end has been shaky, nervous about dropping pitch. Should I just drop Akers instead? Okay, follow-up question to the Kamani Vidal, Ertz, Goddard, Pitts question. Should you just go ahead and drop Akers? What are your thoughts on Vidal's role moving forward with Dobbins out? So I do think that Dobbins has, Dobbins being out, I do think that Vidal has a solid chance of having a decent usable workload there. Oh, thank you for the gift. Appreciate it. But when we're looking at him in that offense, I do think that he would jump ahead of Hassan Haskins, right? Who was just, hey, he's there. But don't take that, especially with rookies, a lot of times, because a lot of times they don't have roles on special teams. So if it comes down to you being a third string running back or being able to, or being inactive. Yeah, I'll be there in a second. If it comes down to you being a third string running back or just being inactive, they will just make you inactive if you can't add that special teams value here. So I would expect Vidal to jump over Hassan Haskins and, have a decent amount of split workload there with Gus Edwards. And honestly, he could technically outshine Edwards. I don't know if he would take over that backfield completely, though. So I think we're probably looking at best kind of upside for him is maybe like a low end RB2 upside. But at the same time, Edwards has dealt with injuries. So he's absolutely someone that we want to keep on our rosters, put on your waiver claims for, and just keep just in case. But when you're saying, should you drop Cam Akers instead of Kyle Pitts? No, I would still drop Kyle Pitts because at this point of the season, if it were earlier in the season, yes, we can make that argument, right? But as we get near the fantasy playoffs, you want your bench to be stacked with backup running backs. You want the handcuffs that could find themselves in good situations. Akers has not looked good this season by any means, in my opinion, since he's been in Minnesota. But if Aaron Jones were to go down, it's very clear that Akers would be the one that would be stepping into that RB1 role compared to Ty Chandler, who's just clearly fallen out of favor. So I would prefer to keep Akers on the premise of he's a backup to a 29-year-old running back who has been banged up all season, who has recent injury history as well, and could very well fall into an RB1 role. Akers could very well fall into an RB1 role here as you head into the fantasy playoffs. You don't want to be fighting to get your waiver claim in for him if Aaron Jones goes down. You want to already have him. So that's how I prefer, is you're kind of like heading to the fantasy playoffs while, trying to figure out what's going on at tight end earlier in the midseason made sense. Right now, you want to limit yourself there and focus on those high upside opportunities on your bench. You're stashing your Braylon Allens, right? Your Cam Akers, your Kamani Vidals, your Ray Davis, right? Hey, even in deeper leagues, you might want to stash a Sean Tucker on your bench because of, what he would be able to step into if one of the running backs went down there in Tampa Bay. Stack with those high upside options. right? Your Blake, hey, even as much as I talked about Kyron Williams, you're Blake Corum, right? You want to roster a guy like Blake Corum heading into the fantasy playoffs, because what if Kyron were to go down? Boom, you got yourself an RB1. So no, I would drop the tight end. I would drop Pitts. I know tight ends have been shaky. Thank you so much. I got the little cowboy gift on TikTok over here. But again, and this kind of speaks to, I think I talked about tight ends on last week's show. Ertz is someone who I trust a lot more than others might. While we loved Ben Sinnott in draft season and heading in and with the future of what he could be, Cliff Kingsbury has shown like clearly he does like to use Zach Ertz. Age ain't an issue for him on that end there, and he'll continue to be a high volume target. And no secondary option at receiver has really stepped up. With Luke McCaffrey, we'd like him to become a thing. He hasn't really become a thing. Noah Brown obviously plays some level of a role, but we have a known capacity with him in terms of him being a wide receiver too in that offense. So really Ertz has been behind Austin Eckler maybe, but even, somewhat ahead of Austin Eckler too, has been the second most trustworthy pass catcher for Jaden Daniels in this offense here. So Ertz is somebody who I feel super comfortable with rolling as my as a low end tight end one rest of season. Roll him out, especially if you're in PPR. Feel good about it. I see someone with an Ertz question as well. Dell or Addison. So Dell or Addison would be Addison for me. And then Ertz or Pitts. Ertz for sure. Again on that one. For sure. Let me see. We got some other questions here. Pick 2, JSN, Marvin Harrison Jr., K9 or Tyrone Tracy. It's going to be JSN and Kenneth Walker on that one. Kenneth Walker is the running back that I would have ranked the highest. And then JSN, we talked about, I've officially moved JSN up in my rankings above DK Metcalf for sure. Start 2, Jennings from Sweatshirts. Juwan Jennings, Tank Dell, Jamison Williams, Taysom Hill. Help, please. That one is so Jameson is honestly the one that I do love. I feel like this one I feel, and this is also a DFS thing. I feel this is a good Jameson week right here. I'm loving Jamison Williams. Juwan Jennings. If we also have Brock Purdy coming back would be fantastic. Even if we have to not get Brock Purdy back at the same time, just Jennings and the way that he has stepped up as the clear wide receiver one in that offense. At this point, you have to look at him over Deebo Samuel. Deebo's having a struggle year. Reminder, as we just talked about the running backs, and I think maybe I talked about this on last week's show. I can't remember. I know I did on some podcast last week. Deebo Samuel is in a down year. This is what he does. Off year, on year, off year, on year. I don't expect Deebo to bounce back as we head through the rest of the season. I feel more comfortable with Juwan Jennings. That said, you're probably going to get good value on Deebo next year. I love looking at players in that way. It's just how Deebo is. So it's Jennings and Jamison Williams that I would go with there. Flex 1, Najee, Tyreek, Gus, DeAndre Hopkins, or DJ. You got to give me more on the DJ there. I don't know if it's DJ Moore or if you're abbreviating somebody on that one. I assume it's DJ Moore. But of that grouping, quite frankly, it is between Tyreek and DJ Moore on that one. I lean towards. I want to say, let me just double check. I'm like 99% sure that it's, and it's tough because it's not an ideal matchup, but it's still Tyreek that I would go with over DJ Moore. I know it's frustrating. I know. And it's not the best matchup in the world, but it is still Tyreek that I would go with. What was that? All right, let's do one more question here. The extension of the tight end question with Kyle Pitts and Cam Akers and dropping for Kamani Vidal. Comment was that you have Aaron Jones and James Conner as your 2 starting running backs, and you've got Braylon Allen, Trey Benson, and Cam Akers on your bench, and you want to stash Kamani Vidal. Yeah. It's still Kyle Pitts that I would drop. David Njoku or Taysom Hill. Oh man, on that one, it's gonna be Taysom Hill for me. And long question, short, long answer, short on that one. When you look at the numbers of what Taysom Hill is in a bust week, it's not that much different from a low end tight end one. So when you look at it from that perspective, you stop saying, oh my gosh, I don't want to start Taysom Hill in the wrong week. And you start to look at it as, I don't really care if it's not going to be a Taysom Hill week. I'm still going to start Taysom Hill at tight end over the vast majority of people. The exceptions would be Brock Bowers, Travis Kelce, still Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Trey McBride, right? Other than that, we're rolling out Taysom Hill and we're risking it, especially in a matchup with the LA Rams. Yeah, for sure. It's uncomfortable. Now, when it comes to flex position, that's where things start to get shaky because his upside compared to a running back or a wide receiver, that's very different. But when it's apples to apples, just in the tight end position, I take the risk with Taysom Hill because the floor is not so scary, to be honest, compared to the floor that you typically get. Pick one. Tua or Love. Happy holidays. Happy holidays to you as well. Tua coming off of the fantastic week. That said, I don't like this matchup here with Green Bay. They do not allow a ton of pass volume at the same time. This is we're unfortunately in the Tua cold weather portion of the schedule. Now that said, this and then the championship matchup against Cleveland are the two weather issues. Other than that, it's not like a major concern in any of the other matchups. This one, though, 8 p.m. game, Green Bay, it's going to be like, 32? It's not super cold, but for Tua, that is extremely cold in a bad matchup. It just makes me uncomfortable. He just typically does not do good in cold weather. Now, granted, he came out and said that he ain't scared of the cold and bring it. But I still have pushed him back a little bit further in the rankings for that reason and have Jordan Love higher. Not an ideal matchup for either one of them, to be quite frank. Let's do, because we still got to do my fourth and fifth favorite thankful players. Let's talk about one more running back in Chuba Hubbard. I'm so thankful. Shout out to Chuba Hubbard for absolutely carrying my best ball teams. He is the man. Good Lord. that one right there has paid off in ways that you cannot even begin to explain. If you don't have Chuba Hubbard, if you have him, the value that it has been on your best ball teams. Hubbard was written off, as a running back that couldn't really be a difference maker in the offseason. And he has gone out and proved that is not the case and snagged the big contract at the same time. Chuba is RB13 in half PPR in average fantasy points per game, despite playing on a absolute dumpster fire team in the Carolina Panthers, and essentially a top 12 running back in all statistical categories. Wildly impressive considering that, while I do like Bryce Young and I'm no negative to Bryce Young whatsoever, love him and I'm loving his development. We are pro Bryce Young, team Bryce Young. He's so happy. He's so sweet. So I cheer for him all that I can. But, at this point in his young career, he's still developing. He's not, considered a massive threat by defenses. So it does tend to make things not super easy for the running game. And despite that, and the lack of, high upside threat at receiver, Chuba has thrived in conditions where, other running backs would have failed, right? And this is the testament to both him and the Dave Canales offense that we were, very hopeful Jonathan Brooks would thrive in as well. He could at some point, but it'll be interesting to see how this backfield moves forward in 2025 as they clearly try and work a high upside committee. But the offense does need to, it remains to be seen how much we can trust that. We'll probably get some good value on both of them next year. But regardless, Chuba has been wonderful this season. Shout out to him and his fantastic performances. Super thankful for drafting Chuba Hubbard and the way that he has just been such a solid running back in fantasy this season. We'll take some more questions here. Let's see, Waddle or Lad. I do have Lad over Waddle. Waddle has the higher upside for sure. Lad is the safer option. So it's Lad that I would go with. It's just, I want to see one more week to truly believe in Waddle. Now, granted, I've got a league that I'm starting him in, but compared to Lad, I would go with Lad. Tracy or Marv. I would go with Marvin Harrison Jr. over Tracy. Yeah, comment from Del J. Kyron wish I had drafted him. Most people. Oh, thank you. I'm going to show this comment from Raven while I'm talking here for a second. But if you're watching on the YouTube channel, but Kyron Williams, unfortunately for a lot of people, missed out because there was just this general perspective that was pushed by a lot of analysts that he was absolutely just going to be a flash in the pan, a late round wide receiver in real draft, late round draft wide receiver or running back that was just going to turn around and be unusable, fade to the background, as we have seen countless times before. But Kyron is built different. We love to see it for sure. CD Brown or AJ Brown, rest of season, full PPR. AJ for sure. And I know that AJ was incredibly frustrating before last week. And obviously the injury to Devonta Smith did play a little bit of a role in that because it's been such a weird offense where AJ is still getting volume, but the offense has just been essentially Saquon moving up and down the field and then Jalen Hurts cleaning up at the goal line. And it's just been such a weird season for anybody else to thrive in the offense. That said, over the past month, things had gotten a little bit shaky for AJ, but it's still AJ Brown that I trust for the higher upside option rest of season. Follow-up question, CD or Mixon full PPR? I would still go with Mixon over CD on that one. Again, I talked a little bit earlier about Joe Mixon, just the way that the Texans offense is just running so aggressively through him. Just because obviously things have been a little bit shaky with that receiving core and CJ Stroud. So, trusting for sure. Joe Mixon is the guy with the upside and the solid floor there. Although it was good to finally see. I feel like we can trust CD rest of season. So that's not a negative indictment of CD rest of season. At least we've seen that there is a decent connection there in terms of volume with Cooper Rush. We're going to get volume there. We're going to get targets. We're not panicked over that. But again, just leaning that direction. I see a good question over here. Tua or Jaden Daniels rest of season? Jaden Daniels for sure. You got to remember that those subpar performances that he had before, which really weren't even that bad, they weren't that bad, were potentially influenced by the fact that he was dealing with that rib injury. I've talked about it before. I feel like I've talked about it 1,000 times that the rib injuries and the mobile quarterbacks, they don't mesh. And so it's not unusual to see just a terrible downtick in performance from them when that happens. So the fact that we saw him look a lot better last week, and granted, yes, it came in the back half. Things were a little shaky earlier, but he was mobile on the ground and got the touchdown. So Jaden Daniels, rest of season, is still the guy that I trust over Tua. Although I am feeling more positive about Tua moving forward, just because Tua's schedule, aside from championship week and this week where I've pushed him back a little bit, to his schedule in general, not so shabby. Not so shabby there in Miami. Let's talk about my fifth and final player that I am thankful for. I've talked about 4 running backs here, and it was Devon Achane, Kyron Williams, Josh Jacobs, and Chuba Hubbard. But we're going to close things out with a wide receiver that I'm thankful for. It's Darnell Mooney. This is one that I wanted to include, not because there was any kind of grand hatred of Darnell Mooney heading into the season, unlike the other guys where people were just, like nailing into them negativity. Mooney didn't go through that. It's just that nobody really thought he was going to make a significant impact. But he is one of my favorite success stories for the season because from a personal perspective, I held on with conviction with this man that Darnell Mooney was real after his rookie season. I could not be moved off of that viewpoint. We had the second season where he popped, and then obviously things just went so far downhill from that perspective. And it, despite the fact that we knew it was a situation of quarterback just, well, I love Justin Fields, not an indictment on Justin Fields. Often he can't hit that type of receiver. Look at George Pickens, right? The upside for George Pickens shot through the roof when Russell Wilson came in. Justin Fields just doesn't mesh with that type of George Pickens, Darnell Mooney type of receiver very well. And I knew in my heart of hearts that if Darnell Mooney just got himself a quarterback that was able to get the ball downfield, that we would see the Darnell Mooney that we saw glimpses of earlier in his career finally pop through. So as a testament, as a true believer, as a stubborn truther here, just this season and the way that Mooney has pulled through has been so wonderful. So wonderful. I'm going to cherry pick stats here because that's what I feel like doing. But it's because week 1 did not count for Atlanta. So I just, when I look at week 1 and the stats for Atlanta players in week 1, I don't count that because that was not Kirk Cousins. That was Schmirk Sessions. It was a different player. It was not Kirk. Kirk needed a minute to actually start believing that he could play on that Achilles, to trust it, to actually step and not feel like terrified that it was going to pop again. But, you know, hey, and he did also get a bunch of preseason live action as well. So I eliminate that first game. I also am eliminating the last game where Mooney got injured. So they also had a bye week right before that. So specifically when I am looking at Darnell Mooney stats, I'm looking at weeks 2 through 10. Those are weeks where, not inclusive of the week 1, where he has played the vast majority of snaps. Over that time period, Mooney was wide receiver 13 in average points per game. Wide receiver 13. Oh, my boy. Oh, my gosh. No controversy here. Again, this was just a moral victory for the Darnell Mooney truthers out there. And also a moral victory for people that drafted the Falcons, right? Because, you know, and Kyle Pitts was one that was kind of like on the edge of, no one was really drafting Kyle Pitts as a top 5. He was kind of borderline right there. But no one was really looking at him and saying that this is a guy that could finish as, you know, the overall tight end 1. And there wasn't significant draft capital that we had to invest in him. But, you know, when you're looking at the Falcons, Bijan was a round 1 pick. London was debatable based off where, you know, what platform you were drafting him on and who you were listening to. But generally speaking, his ADP was round 2 to 3. He has hit for his ADP. Again, Mooney has well overshot his ADP. Kyle Pitts, the odd man out. But really just congrats to this entire Atlanta offense for just thriving and making us not feel stupid for the fact that we were drafting 2 Falcons players in the first couple of rounds. I raised my eyebrows and opened up my eyes wide because I was definitely one of those people. I was one of those people, I'm not going to lie, who was like, yeah, Bijan, round 1, we feel good. And I was aggressive with Drake London for sure. He was a round 2 guy for me. Lots of Drake London there. So shout out to the Atlanta Falcons offense. Thankful, so thankful that they pulled through from a fantasy perspective for us. A few more questions here, and then we are going to head out. I'm showing this comment from Lindsay because I absolutely love this. She drafted 4 of the 5 players on this list. She is also thankful for them. And I know her fantasy teams are fire if those are the vast majority of her players that she drafted, because they have been killing it this season. Showing a comment here from Edge LOL. Thank you for the answers. Happy holidays. Appreciate all you guys tuning in. We'll get a couple more questions over here on TikTok as well. Waddle, Reed, White in the flex. Help. You know, for me, it's between Reed and White, because those White is a stable option, and I do feel like Reed is a mildly stable option, right, compared to Waddle. It's actually White that I do feel the most comfortable with, particularly if you're in full PPR. If you're in full PPR, it is White that I would go with. If you're in half PPR, I would probably lean towards Jaden Reed. I just want to see it repeat with one more week from Jalen Waddle before I lean into that aggressively. It's just a safety thing, just because we know the floor had been so ugly with him prior to last week's blow-up game. Who do I start at flex? Gus Edwards, Dowdle, Jacoby Myers, Arcade Otten. You know, honestly, given the level of struggle that the Cowboys offense has had sometimes on the ground recently since the change in quarterback. Jacoby Myers getting a new quarterback, and then Cade Otton, I still think he still offers upside. Mike Evans coming back obviously did affect things. It's Gus Edwards. Also, as a note on Cade Otton and Mike Evans in this matchup against Carolina, it's a good matchup, but it's also a matchup where it's very easy to lean aggressively into the ground game. Now, granted, this is a potentially very good matchup for Cade Otton. We've seen tight ends do well against Carolina. But Gus Edwards is the guy that I would trust the most to have the safest floor there. Oh, good question from Damien. Do we think Amari Cooper will turn it down or will turn it around? For some reason, maybe it's the fact that he's been dealing with injuries, and maybe it hits in the fantasy playoffs. That's the key there. If he can get healthy for the fantasy playoffs, we may go back to seeing that kind of boom bust nature for him. But unfortunately, we haven't been even getting the boom bust, and that's what's been frustrating with him. It's just been, when it hits, it's been okay. It's been all right, but it's not the boom week winning upside that Amari Cooper has offered in the past. So I do kind of get worried that this is just a year where health is a concern that's pulling him down. And I hate to say this, maybe he's an older receiver. Maybe we hit a wall with him as well. It was bound to happen at some point. So no, I don't feel super confident, unfortunately, that Amari Cooper is going to turn it around. I think he'll be a usable fantasy asset, not someone that we have to bench. He'll be, a viable flex range. But we should have Keon Coleman coming back here soon. So, you think about Keon Coleman, he had been on a little hot streak there where he was having borderline wide receiver 1 finishes. Khalil Shakir has been solid. The run game has been strong with James Cook. So honestly, man, I just don't feel like there's a massive amount of upside there for Amari Cooper. So no, I don't feel like Amari Cooper is going to turn it around, unfortunately. All right. That wraps things up. Oh, see a question here. CMC worth starting this week? Absolutely. This is a matchup where I feel like we could see that Christian McCaffrey boom week. Buffalo has been very vulnerable on the ground compared to attacking them through the air. So yeah, if you're frustrated with Christian McCaffrey, and I don't blame you on that one, I am too. Just know that this is a strong potential boom week for him. All right. Oh no, sorry, JT. I'm sorry. Let me answer your question here. You got a defensive question here. Cincinnati, Seattle, or Tennessee? I'm sorry. I saw that right there that I hadn't even trying to get it answered, and I haven't answered it for you. So Cincinnati, Seattle, and Tennessee. I lean towards Seattle on this one, and it's a little bit risky, if we're being honest with ourselves on that one, just because technically Aaron Rodgers could be in a foul mood and just throw aggressive volume and, throw several touchdowns. That's possible, but I do think this is a good opportunity, and they've been pulling it together recently. The Seattle defense has been a little bit more stout recently in terms of creating turnovers, and that's the key there. I think Rodgers can, fully give us a couple of pick sixes. We may not have Breece Hall in this matchup here, so the Seattle defense is the one that I would lean towards on that one. Sorry, I did not see your question. And then one more here. Taysom Hill or David Njoku. That one I said earlier, Taysom Hill on that one. We trust Taysom Hill, and we want to play him despite, potential not bust weeks. His potential bust weeks do still at least get us roughly around 7 fantasy points there. The upside is super high. Taysom Hill is a solid start for me over literally everyone but like 4 other tight ends. All right, that wraps things up here. Again, very, 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 very thankful for everyone tuning in. Thanksgiving is my favorite holiday. I spent too much time trying to get a turkey today. That was crazy. I spent like an hour before the show trying to go get a turkey. But I've got all my stuff, and we're going to cook delicious food and eat delicious Thanksgiving food tomorrow and watch football and play DFS and make bets. And it's going to be a fantastic Thanksgiving. My Packers are playing as always. So shout out to Thanksgiving and football for being my favorite holiday ever. That wraps things up. As a reminder, if you please follow, no matter what platform you are watching on, if you follow me at It's Tera Time, literally anywhere, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, just so you can get updates on notifications, all of my information, articles and stuff and videos, and anytime I go live, that would be wonderful and greatly appreciated. If you are not subscribed by, like a reminder, this is a lot of you are watching live. This is actually a podcast. It's a podcast. So if you could subscribe to the Dear Miss Fantasy podcast, that would be greatly appreciated, as well as the fantasy podcast for Player Profiler, the mailbag show. So thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you all have an absolutely wonderful Thanksgiving. Eat lots of food, enjoy lots of football. And then if you have any questions, obviously, because we've got a little bit of downtime tomorrow. Feel free to tag me and ask me any additional questions and I'll get to them. Other than that, appreciate you all tuning in. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful fantasy week. Bye, guys.